Ready? There we go. All right, so we are going to look at Hosea. I guess depends on where you get it out of. If you get it out of the Hebrew Tanakh, then it's going to be Hosea 12:1 and 2. Then in our modern translations, it would be 11:12 and 12:1. So let's talk to our Elohim, and then we'll take a look at some stuff that we have to be aware of, but also some stuff that we can give some tools to kind of use in other aspects throughout life as well. So, Father, thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask always that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us. We thank you in the name of Yahushua. Amen. All right, so we start off with history, and the history that's taking place during this particular time is that the house of Israel, we've talked about it, is a vassal state of the Assyrian Empire, and they're being forced to pay a heavy tribute to Assyria. So Israel, they want to be free from this heavy tax and this allegiance to Assyria. They are courting Egypt and trying to get Egypt to help them to overthrow Assyria. This isn't the first time that they've tried this, and the other times that they've tried this is they've kind of backed out of the picture. But it's kind of like swapping one mess for another mess. Instead of paying Assyria, you're going to be paying Egypt. So Assyria at the time, at this particular time in history, is the most powerful empire in the world. Rome hasn't come into being as of yet. Let's see. So right below the surface of these historical events is a theme of the house of Israel having abandoned their relationship with Yahuwah their Elohim. They did that early on with the whole Jeroboam thing. Is moving farther and farther away, seeking relief from false deities. They become dependent on the blessings and the perceived fruitfulness of false deities, and they've been overcome with a false spiritual dependence. We could ask, does this sound familiar? Because it repeats itself throughout history. So at a deeper level, we have to consider the stages of change brought on by dogma that have led us as individuals away from a fruitful relationship with Yahuwah our Elohim and the blessings of that relationship. So the studies, or the verses in this study, are going to be taken from the Hebrew Tanakh, which, like I said, differ from the modern translations by a verse or two. And you see this throughout the Torah and the Tanakh, that there's differences. So if you have your regular modern translation, it's going to be 11:12. Otherwise, it's 12:1. Regardless, it says, Ephraim surrounds me with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. And Judah is yet wayward towards Elohim and towards the set-apart one who is faithful. So we have to kind of start breaking this down into phrases. And we'll start with the phrase, Ephraim surrounds me with lies. Now, we've considered Ephraim in times past. Ephraim is the name that's given to the northern kingdom, or the house of Israel. But we've also learned that Ephraim, as a word, means to be doubly fruitful, from the roots peri, that means fruit. So Ephraim is a representation for us of fruitfulness. The word for surrounds is sevanuni, that comes from the root sevav, that means not only to surround, but it also means to turn away from. So from this we could consider an idea of turning away from fruitfulness. So it is Yahuwah who is speaking this verse. So we can consider that something turns away the fruitfulness of Yahuwah. And that something is found in the word vechachash, that means with lies. And the root of this word is chachash, that also means to deceive, to deny, and to be untrue, as well as to deal falsely and to fake obedience. So that's an interesting concept, the concept of faking obedience. This word also refers to a failure of the flesh. So if we consider those things, then these are the things that will turn away any fruitfulness from Yahuwah. So let's look at the phrase, and the house of Israel with deceit. Now we've considered that in the name of Israel, there's a choice. That either Elohim prevails in our life, or we wrestle against Elohim. And this concept is that either we allow Elohim into our life and we live in accordance to his instructions, or we rebel against Elohim and those instructions. So the word used for with deceit is uvem rema. I don't know why they couldn't just simply use rema. That is the root word that means, or mira, that's the root word that means to be fraudulent. Now, this word also means to be subtle and to have guile. Okay, guile is a form of deception. The root of this word is rama, that means to mislead, to delude, and to betray. So what we can consider is that the treachery, falsehood, and deception mislead us through subtlety. Okay? Treachery, falsehood, and deception mislead us through subtlety. I know this is kind of a gross analogy, but you say that you put the frog in the water and you put the water on to boil. The frog doesn't recognize that the water's getting hotter, and it doesn't jump out of the pan. And then before you know it, well, the frog's dead because the water's boiling and it never knew. So this is the subtlety of deception. So we consider the woman was beguiled by the subtle serpent. Hoshea said that there would be smooth talkers that would tickle people's ears and lead them astray. And then Kepha, or Peter, even warned that the writings of Paul would be twisted to suit unscriptural agendas. So if we consider these things, then we know that over a long period of time, this subtlety has brought forth dogma, and we'll consider dogma a little bit more as we move on. So we have to ask, what is it that deceives us subtly so that Elohim ceases to prevail in our life to the point that we're wrestling against him? Can something very subtly change our perception of Elohim to where we actually think that we are in a relationship where Elohim prevails, but in reality we're wrestling against Elohim? We're in rebellion because we've allowed ourselves to bring a dogma, and I'll repeat it again later, but dogma, the definition of dogma, is a doctrine or a teaching that cannot be proven. Okay? And we have a lot of dogmas throughout church history, both on the Jewish side and on the Christian side, that they pull the stuff out of a hat, but you cannot verify it from the Torah, the prophets, the writings, and the words of Yahushua. So there's something to consider is, why do we believe what we believe again, and what is the origin of that belief? So we have to ask, what is it that deceives us subtly so that Elohim ceases to prevail in our lives to the point that we're wrestling against him? We are in rebellion against our Elohim. We can consider that the transition from having Elohim prevail to moving to being in rebellion against Elohim is a process that will separate us from Elohim and his fruitfulness. We're going to consider this concept a little further in verse 2, because verse 2 almost comes out and says this exact thing. But let's consider the balance of this verse. And Judah is yet wayward towards Elohim and towards the set-apart one who is faithful. So the phrase, "and Judah is yet wayward towards Elohim," could read, "and Judah continues to be ruled by Elohim." So, well, maybe that's a good thing. The word used for wayward is rud, that also means to be ruled as well as to wander restlessly. The word that precedes this word is od, that means to continue, but it also refers to going around in circles. So we've considered in past study that Judah means to praise and to be grateful. The word im is used to say towards in the English of this verse, but it also means by and by reason of. Now, im has a root word, and that root word is amam, that means dark or dim. And if we consider the root letter of this to be ayin, that means eye and represents perception, so we can consider a concept of a dark perception that leads by its reasoning. Okay? So I can reason all kinds of things. I can invent all kinds of things based on subtlety of the dogma that I've accepted, and then what I do is I begin to create more dogma, and I start to move farther and farther away from what truth actually is. And this is, we can relate this to the same thing we could consider in gossip. We receive a certain truth, or we receive a second-hand truth. Somebody receives a truth, and then they give you their interpretation. At that point, it begins to become dogma, and as it rolls on, before you know it, you're believing a full-blown lie, a full-blown falsehood that started with something that was innocent has now become something serious. Does that make any sense? Okay. So, the root letter ayin, perception. The word following this is el, that means mighty one, judge, authority. Okay? So these definitions force us to ask, is my gratitude and praise part of a continuance that is part of a helical loop and based on a dark or dim perception of my mighty judge and ruler that leads me away from him according to the reasoning of that dark perception? Is my perception, has it become dim to where my relationship with my Elohim has become flawed, where I think I'm moving forward in a relationship, but in reality I'm moving backwards out of a relationship? So that is something also that is going on within the house of Israel, is that they still think that they're good. But the reality is that they're moving farther and farther away from Elohim into the worship of false deities and whatnot. So leads us back to a question, do I believe that Yahuwah Elohim exists? Because if I believe that Yahuwah Elohim exists, then I have to consider that perhaps what I find in the Torah is actually something I need to pay attention to. There we go. So, if the first part of this verse deals with subtle falsehoods that have slowly crept into our understanding and relationship with Yahuwah Elohim that separate us from his blessing, we have to ask ourselves, does any aspect of our system of belief distance us from him? Are we wandering restlessly in our system of belief, thinking that we're praising and grateful to Yahuwah Elohim, while in reality separated from him? This fruitfulness towards us, or his fruitfulness towards us and his blessing. So are we wandering restlessly in our system of belief, thinking that we're praising and grateful to Yahuwah our Elohim, while in reality separated from him, his fruitfulness towards us, and his blessings? One of these days I'll learn how to word this stuff a lot easier and a lot easier to read for sure. Okay, so. But y'all understand what that's saying. Are we aware? Okay. Are we wondering okay, we've already said that one. We have asked numerous times the question, why do we believe what we believe? And what is the origin of those beliefs? The two very important questions that we have to ask when we're studying and we come across something, okay, well, I've held on to this for years. Where does it come from? And so I'm going to research where it comes from to see if it's something that I want to hold on to. And if it's something that is in agreement with the Torah, the prophets, the writings, and the words of Yahushua, then it's something that's probably okay to hold on to. If it misses the mark in any of those areas, then it's something that we should reconsider. Okay, so let's see, where were we now? Okay, way up here. And fruitfulness, okay, why do we below? Okay, the last phrase, and towards the set-apart one who is fruitful, begins with the word ve'im, which again gives us the word im. So this forces us to ask, is our concept of Elohim flawed by our dark or dim perception of him that has been forced or formed by a false belief system? Has my reasoning, considering certain verses, been flawed because I haven't taken the time to confirm that reasoning, that idea, that concept from the beginning to the middle through the words of Yahushua and the Bezoras? Okay, we don't go farther into the epistles because those are the cause of the dogma. We want to stand on what Paul says or what Peter says or something, and we form a doctrine out of that, but it's a doctrine that cannot be proven to be true according to the Torah, the prophets, the writings, and the words of Yahushua. And it's funny, you know, the whole Facebook thing. A lot of people like to put little passages of scripture up there, and it's funny because most of those that I've seen are quotes from Paul. Very few people, I haven't seen a whole lot of people that actually quote what Yahushua had to say. And that's an interesting thing. We're so taken by the epistles that we miss the actual words in red that the Master actually had to speak. So this is what leads us down the road of dogma. Okay? I don't know if that makes any sense. So, our various dogmas did not develop overnight. We will not set them straight overnight either. So we consider the definition of dogma in a past study to be any teaching that cannot be proven to be true. Do we stay in the helix, or do we seek to get off and follow our Elohim according to his truth? And again, this goes back to, okay, I have this doctrine within my personal system of belief. It's time for me to examine that doctrine. I need to find out where it came from. Do I actually want to hold on to that? Or do I want to let it go? Can I prove this? All right? So, this is the choice in the name of Israel. Does Elohim prevail in our lives, or are we in rebellion? And this is a question that we have, that must be answered by us as individuals. You know, I can't tell you what to believe or what not to believe. You know, the preacher, the pastor, the rabbi, the best-selling author, the televangelist, none of them can tell you what to believe. You have to accept what's in your system of belief, and you have to research it for yourself, and you have to work out your own deliverance. And here I am quoting Paul, you know, with reverence. So I have to understand why I believe what I believe and not be dependent on someone else to tell me about it. This takes us back to what we've just considered throughout the feasts and festivals. Am I willing to hear the voice of my Elohim in the shofar? Can I hear his voice for myself? Or am I dependent on the silver trumpet to call me so that I can listen to what Elohim has to say based on what someone else says? Okay? So, has to be answered by us as individuals. So let's consider verse 2, which will confirm what we've just considered. In verse 2, or verse 1, whichever way you look at it, Ephraim strives after Ruach, and follows after the east wind. All of the day he multiplies lies and desolation. And they make a covenant with Assyria, and oil is carried into Egypt. So that's kind of a, you know, we're trying to make a covenant with Assyria, is what the house of Israel is trying to do. Keep them happy, keep them off guard, make them think everything's okay. And we're over here paying this oil, this priceless oil, to Egypt to try to get them to come and push away the bad Assyrians, is what's going on historically. So we're going to begin with the phrase, Ephraim strives after Ruach. The word for strives is re'ah, that means to graze or to feed. This word implies being led by a shepherd to pasture. The word ruach means spirit, but it also means wind. So this phrase is not talking about the spirit of Yahuwah, but it's describing an empty spirit, one that yields no spiritual food. So from this phrase, we can consider that the fruitfulness that comes from deception feeds on an empty spirit. As such, the spirit starves. Okay? Fruitfulness that comes from deception feeds on an empty spirit, and as such, our spirit, we could actually say, is what starves. The issue here is that this spirit believes that it's being fed as it slowly dies. The origin of this spirit is found in the phrase, and follows after the east wind. The word for follows is verodef, that also means to pursue and to chase with the goal of securing. The word for east wind in this phrase is kadim, that refers to the east wind, but it comes from the root kadam, that means to meet, to receive, to precede, and to project oneself. It implies meeting someone in order to get help. So historically we can look at this verse and say that they are seeking the east wind. They are seeking to find help from someone. So they're looking to meet with someone. In this case, they're looking to meet with Egypt to try to get some things to change. But it implies meeting someone. Okay. So what we can consider from this is that a starving spirit is seeking to feed on what is empty. It is led by a shepherd that does not exist, and is seeking to secure itself by seeking the aid of what cannot help it. So let's read that again and just kind of let it sink in. A starving spirit is seeking to feed on what is empty. It is led by a shepherd that does not exist, and is seeking to secure itself by seeking the aid of something that cannot help it. So basically, it's a belief system that has no spiritual foundation. There's basically nothing there that will feed our spirit, nothing that will shepherd our spirit, guide our spirit to the right kind of food. So basically, we are in spiritual poverty, and as a result, we simply die spiritually. We starve to death spiritually. Now this was the case in the house of Israel, who refused to make teshuvah and return to Seh Elohim, but sought the aid of Egypt against Assyria. Historically, this idea is carried over to the balance of the verse that says, all of the day he multiplies lies and desolation. They make a covenant with Assyria, and oil is carried into Egypt. So Israel was falsifying its conditions with Assyria in order to appease them, while secretly paying Egypt to help them. They were seeking to exchange one harsh master for another. So let's consider this a little closer to gain some insight into our own condition. Are we seeking an empty spiritual condition, hoping that our spirit will be fed by it? Do we depend on an empty spiritual relationship with something that is not associated with the Ruach of Yahuwah to make us fruitful? Are we seeking to exchange one false spirit for another one? So this takes us back to, why do I believe what I believe? What is the origin of my belief system? Is it something that will, in reality, feed me with the food that comes from Seh HaElohim, or is it something that it's a whole bunch of empty calories that go nowhere? We can't survive eating gummy bears. Okay, I just throw out gummy bears. Okay. Although, when you're done with the grandchildren, you want to send them back to the kids, you give them gummy bears and Red Bulls, and you're good to go. Anyway, I didn't say that. We can edit this later. Okay, so we considered earlier that this doesn't just happen. It's a progression where the first false belief brings on the creation of other false beliefs to support it. A white lie leads to more lies to cover it up. Now, the word for Assyria is Asher, that means steps or stages. The word that precedes it is once again the word im, that is used to say with in the English of this verse. It can also mean, like we've said, by and by reason of, and the root of this word, again, still, amam, that means dark or dim, still the ayin that represents perception. So again, a dark or dim perception of where we are going and the reasons for our journey. Okay? Why are we taking the steps we're taking? Why have we taken the steps that we have taken? What steps do we need to take? If our perception of what we need to do is based on dogma, then naturally our steps are going to continue to lead us in a false direction. So again, it takes us back. What is the origin of what I believe? And do I need to research it and fix it? Okay? So in this case, okay, there we go. The word used for covenant is uvarit. It comes from the root barit, that means an alliance, a treaty, a pledge. It can also mean an alliance made by marriage, and since this is Hosea, it deals with the concept of a broken marriage. It comes from the root bara, that means to feed or to be fed by, and it comes from the root barar, that means to choose, as well as to purify or to be purified by. What we consider is that by and through steps led by an empty spirit and our reasoning based on our dark or dim perception, we've taken steps and gone through stages that have placed us in an alliance with a false marriage in which we seek to be fed from and purify ourselves. So we have a whole lot of different interpretations of who the bride is. And the concept is that Israel will always be the bride. It's not this concept of, well, the church is the bride. It upsets some people, but it's not Israel as the concept of Israel as we know it. Israel is those who have chosen that Elohim prevails. That is the bride. We become the children of Israel, that we are restored and established because Elohim prevails in our lives. Or we are restored and established because we recognize when we are in rebellion and we are able to make teshuvah. So in this case, we become the Proverbs 31 woman. It's another study for another time. So, all right. So the word used for make is yichrotu, that really doesn't mean to make. This word yichrotu means to be cut off. It also refers to the cutting that took place in a covenant, where the parties involved in the covenant would cut themselves to shed blood on the covenant marker so that the blood would be mixed together, stating, "We are now like family." So they would gather around the stone or whatever, and they would cut themselves, and they would drop some blood, and they would mingle it and say, okay, we're good. You know, when we were kids, we'd cut ourselves, and our best friends, we'd hash it together, and we didn't care about hepatitis or HIV or any of that stuff because we were blood brothers. Yeah. All right. So what we can take from this is by entering into a false alliance, we become cut off from the true alliance with Yahuwah, who alone is Elohim. In this, we begin to feed on non-existent spiritual food that we perceive to be present and starve spiritually in the process. This is how we've gotten to where we are. And the result of this is in the phrase, "and oil is carried